Right now, somewhere tonight, you're going to do something completely insane and not think twice about it. You're going to lie down, close your eyes, and shut off your own senses for 8 hours straight. No hearing, no sight, no ability to run. You'll just trust that nothing out there is going to hurt you while you're gone. Stop and actually picture what that means for a body. For 8 hours, you are a warm, breathing, defenseless slab of meat lying flat on the ground. You can't hear a footstep. You can't smell a predator. If something decided tonight was your night, you wouldn't even know until it was already too late. We never think about this because we don't have to. A locked door does the thinking for us. But strip away the door. Strip away the walls, the roof, the mattress, the blanket. Put that same soft, sleeping body out in the open, in the cold, with rain falling that hasn't stopped in 3 days. The ground is mud. Your skin is soaked, and wet skin loses heat many times faster than dry skin does. There's no fire because fire doesn't survive 3 days of rain either. And here's the brutal part, you still have to sleep. The body doesn't negotiate. Deny it long enough and the mind starts to unravel. Poor judgment, hallucinations, a kind of slow motion collapse at the exact moment you most need to be sharp enough to survive. So somewhere in the deep past, a version of us was lying in exactly that kind of rain, exhausted, freezing, and forced to close its eyes anyway. This video is about the impossibly long chain of solutions our ancestors built, one desperate night at a time, until going to sleep stopped being a gamble and became the safest, most boring part of your day. We start almost 2 million years back, in a place in northern Tanzania called Olduvai Gorge, a jagged crack in the earth that has produced some of the oldest evidence of human ancestors anywhere on the planet. In the 1970s, the archaeologist Mary Leakey was excavating there when she uncovered something strange, a loose ring of stones arranged in a way that didn't look accidental. She recognized the pattern. It resembled something still used today by certain groups, stones stacked to anchor the base of a windbreak, a crude wall of branches wedged between rocks to block the wind and rain. If Leakey was right, this wasn't just a pile of rocks, it was architecture, and it was built by a creature that wasn't even human yet, small-brained, built for a hot savanna nearly 2 million years before Homo sapiens existed. Here's why that matters. We like to picture our earliest ancestors as passive, hunched, shivering, taking whatever the sky threw at them. But a stacked stone windbreak isn't passive. It's a decision. It says, I am not simply going to endure the rain tonight. I am going to do something about it. Of course, the honest version of this story includes doubt. Not every archaeologist agrees those stones were placed by hands. Water, roots, and a few 100,000 years of shifting earth can arrange rocks into shapes that only look intentional. There's no surviving roof, no post hole, nothing but the stones and the argument. And that's actually the deeper lesson here. Sleep barely leaves fingerprints. A pile of leaves rots. A hide blanket disintegrates. The single most important thing a person did every night of their life is also the thing least likely to survive for us to dig up. Fast forward roughly 1.4 million years to a hillside overlooking present-day Nice in the south of France. The site is called Terra Amata. In 1966, archaeologist Henry de Lumley was excavating there when he found dark stains in the soil, circular and oval outlines where something, possibly wooden posts, once stood upright. Inside some of these outlines were shallow pits with the telltale signs of ancient fire. De Lumley's interpretation was bold. These were the remains of huts, dome-shaped shelters built from bent branches a few meters wide, with a hearth burning inside and a stone windbreak angled against the prevailing weather. The date puts this roughly 400,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens, likely built by Homo heidelbergensis, a thick-boned, heavy-browed relative we'd recognize instantly as a caveman in any cartoon. Except the cartoon is wrong. The caveman of pop culture finds a cave and hides in it. He doesn't build anything, he just occupies whatever shelter nature happens to provide. Terra Amata suggests the opposite. On an open hillside with no cave for miles, someone drove posts into the ground, shaped a roof, and lit a fire underneath it on purpose. That combination, a roof over a flame, is the real breakthrough. A roof alone stops rain. Fire alone gets stolen by wind and wet within minutes. Put them together and you get something new. A small pocket of warm, dry air that didn't exist in nature until someone built it. As with Olduvai, this claim is contested. Later researchers who re-examined Terra Amata found signs the soil layers may have shifted over time, which muddies whether those post holes are really post holes or just noise in ancient dirt. The debate hasn't closed, but notice the pattern forming. Every early clue is maybe suggestive argued over, because the thing we're hunting for was designed by nature to vanish by morning. The story stops being a maybe once we reach Border Cave, tucked in the Lubumbo Mountains on the border of South Africa and Eswatini. The time frame here is around 200,000 years ago, roughly the dawn of Homo sapiens itself. In 2020, a research team led by archaeologist Lynn Wadley published findings in the journal Science describing something remarkable preserved on the cave floor. Actual bedding. Not a stain, not a guess. Bundles of broadleaf grass, cut and layered, physically intact after 200 millennia thanks to the cave's unusual preservation conditions. But the detail that really matters is what was underneath the grass. Ash. And it wasn't incidental. The layering suggests people were deliberately laying fresh bedding on top of it. That's a strange thing to do until you understand what ash actually does to insects. Fine ash clogs the tiny breeding structures of ticks, mites, and other biting pests, drying them out. It's a natural barrier against exactly the kind of bugs that would otherwise crawl onto a sleeping body all night. In other words, some of the very first Homo sapiens weren't just gathering soft plants to lie on. They were treating the ground itself to keep parasites away, something we'd fairly call hygienic. And if a species is already doing something this deliberate 200,000 years ago, it tells you the real starting point of this story is even further back than we can currently see. Move along the same coastline to a rock shelter called Sibudu above the Tangati River, and forward in time to around 77,000 years ago. Same researcher, Lynn Wadley, publishing again in Science, this time in 2011. And this is where the story stops being impressive and starts being almost unbelievable. Wadley's team again found layered bedding pressed into the shelter floor. But when they identified exactly which plants made up that bedding, one stood out: leaves from Cryptocarya woodii, a relative of the wild quince known locally as the Cape laurel. Crush those leaves and they release compounds that are actively toxic to insect larvae. Not a repellent, an insecticide growing naturally on a tree. That means someone at Sibudu walked past dozens of soft, comfortable plants and specifically chose the one whose chemistry killed the things that bite you in your sleep. That's not luck. That's accumulated knowledge, tested and passed down, about exactly which leaf keeps a body safer through the night. It gets stranger. The bedding layers alternated with bands of charred material. Bedding, then ash, then fresh bedding again, over and over. Read as a sequence, it looks like routine maintenance. Burn the old dirty bedding to ash right on the spot, sterilizing the ground, then lay a clean layer on top. 77,000 years ago, people were essentially doing laundry with fire, periodically resetting their sleeping surface to keep it clean. This flips the old picture entirely. These weren't people barely surviving their environment. They were managing it, selecting materials for their chemical properties, maintaining a system over time, thinking ahead to the next night and the one after that. Even the best bedding in the world does nothing about the cold, wet air pressing in from outside. And cold, not bugs, is what actually kills a sleeping body over a long night in bad weather. So who or what kept people alive while they were unconscious and useless? For a long time, the assumption was that early humans slept in one long, unbroken block, the way we're told we're supposed to. Then, in 2017, researchers David Sampson and Charles Nunn published a study in Proceedings of the Royal Society B that quietly overturned that idea. They studied the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania whose sleeping patterns closely resemble how humans likely slept for most of our history, outdoors, in a group. Across 20 tracked nights involving 33 adults, they found something startling. On average, there were only about 18 minutes across the entire night when every single person in camp was asleep at the same time. The rest of the night, someone was always stirring, not standing formal guard, just naturally awake, tending the fire, shifting position, eyes open. Older members tended to wake earlier and sleep earlier. Younger members drifted later. Stack those different rhythms together and you get an unplanned, unscheduled night watch that nobody consciously organized. Researchers call this the Sentinel hypothesis, and it reframes everything. The thing keeping people alive at night was never just a wall or a bed. It was each other, a rotating, accidental watch that meant the fire rarely went untended and the dark was rarely fully unwatched. A fire surviving 3 3 days of rain isn't something you light once. It's something a group keeps alive together, hour by hour, in shifts nobody assigned. Pushed north into a landscape with no forgiveness left in it at all, the Ice Age steppe of Eastern Europe, near the village of Mezerich in Ukraine, around 20,000 years ago. Here, the old toolkit breaks down completely. No caves for hundreds of miles, barely any trees, just open grassland, wind, and freezing rain. So people built shelter out of the only large resource available, mammoths. At Mezerich, archaeologists uncovered the remains of dwellings constructed almost entirely from mammoth bone, jawbones interlocked in herringbone patterns for walls, tusks, and long bones arched overhead to form a dome. The whole structure likely covered in hide and turf. Some of these structures use bones from dozens of individual mammoths, with skulls alone sometimes weighing well over 200 pounds each. This is a group of people on the landscape offering no shelter at all, deciding to build one anyway out of the skeleton of the largest animal they could kill. It's the same instinct from Olduvai, scaled up almost unimaginably, refusing to accept what the land gives you, and engineering something better. The final stop is Skara Brae, a cluster of stone houses on the windswept Orkney Islands off northern Scotland, dated to around 3080 BC. By now, farming has arrived, the Ice Age is long over, and on this treeless, rain-battered island, people built structures that close nearly every loop in this story. These aren't huts that rotted away or bedding that vanished. They're stone houses, walls built from flat slabs packed into earthen mounds for insulation, so well preserved you can still walk their floor plans today. Built directly into the stone of every house are beds, stone slab frames that once held bracken, heather, and hide. A hearth sits at the center. It is, unmistakably, a home built around the act of sleeping safely. The roofs are gone, but we know roughly what topped these houses: rafters of whalebone or scarce driftwood, thatched with turf and straw, and crucially, pitched at an angle. That angle is the whole trick. A sloped roof doesn't just cover you, it sheds water away from where your body lies. That single design decision, tilt the roof so rain runs off instead of soaking through, is the same principle sitting over your head tonight, however many thousands of years removed. So when did humans actually solve sleep? There isn't a single answer, and that's the real point. There's no inventor, no eureka moment, no date you could circle. There's only a chain, a windbreak that might be 1.8 million years old, a disputed hut in France, treated grass bedding at the dawn of our species, an insecticidal self-cleaning bed at Sibudu, a fire kept alive by sleepers taking invisible shifts, a house built from mammoth bone where the land offered nothing, and finally, a pitch stone roof on a freezing island in the North Sea. Every one of those is a partial answer handed up to the next generation to improve. Nobody in that chain knew they were solving anything permanent. They were just trying to survive one more wet, cold night, and each of them left the problem slightly more solved than they found it. Tonight, when you pull a blanket over yourself and let go, understand what that moment actually is. It's the last leg of a relay race that started with someone standing in the rain nearly 2 million years ago, deciding that tonight, at least, the weather wasn't going to win. You didn't invent your dry, safe night. You inherited it from people who lay awake in the rain so that, eventually, you wouldn't have to.